Okay, so today we're going to be discussing some thoughts on the 1954 BBC television adaptation written by Nigel Neal, directed by Rudolph Cartier, of George Orwell's 1984. Orwell's text, published in 1949, is one of the most revered and iconic ever written. Plausibly one of the five most beloved and continually read, placed into school educational curriculums of all time. And yet, despite that, people have much motivation and, frankly, some justified cause to refer to the world in which we live as Orwellian, in reference to that famous text. I myself first read that novel when I was 15, and it was actually not my first exposure to Orwell. I'd read Animal Farm at the age of 14, I believe. I turned 15 that year. I don't know if I'd read Animal Farm before or after that. It doesn't really matter. But so I was familiar with him before I was an adult. Funnily enough, that's not an uncommon experience either. He was on my curriculum in year 11 eventually anyway, where I'd as 1984, where I'd already read it, which was convenient. And to be perfectly honest with you, I'm not the biggest. In a somewhat superficial sense, I'm not the biggest fan of the novel. I find its writing style to be a bit forced and overly descriptive. I think Huxley's prose in Brave New World, both as a conceptual thematic piece and as rich rhetoric, as a glorious weaving of language. Forgive my crudeness, but I think Huxley pisses on Orwell. Huxley has proven to be Huxley's vision of the future proved to be far more relevant and accurate than Orwell's. I remember there's a quote where Huxley wrote a letter to Orwell saying something along the lines of, "You think that men in large boots and jail cells are gonna be the most useful way of pacifying the population forever? Don't be naive. There are far more cost-effective ways." Of course, Orwell hadn't thought of them, and 1984 comes across now as a critique of Stalinism, as the horrifying nightmare that apparently the Soviet Union was during the 1930s, or during the reign of Joseph Stalin throughout the 1920s through to, I believe, 1953. Orwell witnessed Britain become something of a I don't know what you want to say police state, but what's the term? Britain under martial law during the Second World War, a potential invasion by Nazi Germany led to such an extreme uncertain time in his mind, and he feared, especially with the I suspect also with the vague socialization and the nationalisation, the UK picking up tenets of what we might consider today to be socialistic tendencies. We might not think of these things as evil, but we see the encroachment of bureaucracy. We see the kind of things which in 1985 Terry Gilliam was poking fun at in his film Brazil. And these things have their burgeoning in the 1940s in the UK, in the years leading up to the publication of 1984. It's hard to imagine that the growing bureaucracy and the power of the state and the administration of every individual, the classification and categorization of every single subject, didn't inspire Orwell to some extent in him imagining the similarities between a state like Stalinist Russia or Nazi Germany, of course, and where the United Kingdom could eventuate. We get a sense that Orwell was describing in his novel something relatively close to his home, closer to our understanding of Britain in the 1940s/1950s than we initially considered. We have to remember Orwell's text, unlike Huxley's, for example, is one where technology seems to stagnate in favor of this love of this functionality. Perhaps for ideological reasons, it was deemed that, well, the society is perfect, it doesn't need to advance anymore, does it? My final thoughts on this adaptation is that it is extremely effective. A part of me would rather sit down and view this as opposed to an extended stay of Orwell's novel. I don't know. I'll have to look into that adaptation actually released in 84 one day and see how that holds up. Until then, thanks all. Have a great day, night, wherever you are. I hope everyone is well.